The H-4 Hercules is one of the most captivating tales in aviation history. It's a story that weaves together a world at war, a billionaire's ambition, and the limits of mid-century engineering. Though this giant seaplane only managed a single brief flight, its legend has soared for decades. Dive in to discover how war, resourcefulness, and sheer willpower created a colossal aircraft that almost seemed too extraordinary to exist. Now, World War II raged across Europe and the Pacific, demanding vast logistical operations. The U.S. found itself in a predicament. Transporting troops and supplies by sea was increasingly dangerous due to German U-boats prowling the Atlantic. The Navy was losing ships at an alarming rate, and each loss threatened the Allied supply chain. American industry needed an innovative solution to keep men, weapons, and equipment flowing across the ocean. Industrialist Henry Kaiser, renowned for his Liberty-class transport ships, proposed an outsized idea that aligned perfectly with his reputation for thinking on a grand scale. Why not create a massive cargo aircraft that could avoid the perils of German submarines altogether? This aircraft wouldn't be a standard bomber or fighter. Instead, it'd be a cargo-dedicated seaplane that would ferry tanks, troops, and supplies over long distances without relying on vulnerable convoys. Though Kaiser had a proven track record in shipbuilding, he lacked experience in aviation. He found the perfect partner in Howard Hughes, the brilliant, wealthy industrialist who had already made a name for himself in aviation design and record-setting flights. Despite their vastly different personalities, Kaiser, the pragmatic businessman, and Hughes, the eccentric innovator, they initially shared a vision for creating the world's largest aircraft. Their plan for the airplane, which they designated the HK-1, H for Hughes, K for Kaiser, was to carry a mind-boggling 68 tons of cargo. There was talk of it transporting up to 750 troops and even 2 fully equipped Sherman tanks. This was an era when cargo planes capable of carrying such loads seemed almost fanatical, further adding to the HK-1's allure. Now, every detail about the design aimed at achieving record-breaking size, including the enormous wingspan and the capacity to remain airborne for transoceanic flights. Now, what made the proposal so daring was the timescale. The U.S. government wanted an immediate solution to the pressing submarine threat, leaving Kaiser and Hughes to race against the clock. No one had ever built an airplane of this magnitude, and the question remained, could they even do it, and would it be fast enough to matter for the war effort? As the HK-1 concept gained traction, the U.S. government issued a contract to help fund its development. In wartime, money flowed into any venture that promised a strategic advantage, but with that money came immense scrutiny and pressure. Every penny spent on such an experimental project had to be justified, especially when millions of Americans were focused on supporting the war through rationing and purchasing war bonds. The promise of the HK-1 hinged on leveraging the combined genius of Henry Kaiser's industrial approach and Howard Hughes' aviation expertise. Kaiser had revolutionized shipbuilding with his assembly line techniques, constructing Liberty ships at an unprecedented pace. Hughes, on the other hand, was already a legend in aviation circles. He had flight records and had produced aircraft like the Hughes D-2 for the U.S. Army Air Forces. Now, while Kaiser saw a grand production scheme, Hughes was also known for his meticulous perfectionism. If the design called for a special bolt or a specific grade of material, Hughes insisted on getting it exactly right, no matter how much it cost or how long it delayed the project. This clash of styles, the fast, mass-produced approach of Kaiser versus the detail-oriented, sometimes glacial pace of Hughes, soon became a significant source of friction. Another layer to their engineering vision was the reliance on seaplane design. While smaller flying boats and seaplanes were already in use, none approached the HK-1's proposed size. That scale brought with it a host of structural, aerodynamic, and buoyancy challenges. How could a hull so large displace enough water for takeoff? How could the plane handle wave action during rough seas? These were just some of the myriad questions that the engineering teams would grapple with. Yet the allure of circumventing hostile waters was powerful. A giant flying boat could theoretically land just off a beach, unload, and then take off again without the need for long runways or vulnerable port facilities. In an ideal world that could completely bypass the submarine threat. For the U.S. military, that vision was worth pursuing, at least initially. Aluminum shortages forced the H4 Hercules team to turn to Duramold, a wood-based composite. While unconventional, it was strong and lightweight, but its use introduced major challenges. The aircraft's massive wooden sections required intricate molds, precise alignment, and rigorous sealing against moisture to prevent rot. The press mockingly dubbed it the Spruce Goose, despite the primary use of birch. Now, Henry Kaiser, frustrated by delays and soaring costs, abandoned the project, leaving Howard Hughes to press on alone. The Duramold process involved bonding thin birch veneers with plastic resin under heat and pressure. Scaling up this technique for a 218-foot aircraft was a logistical nightmare. Engineers had to carefully control bonding, weight distribution, and structural integrity to ensure flight worthiness. Government regulators were skeptical of the wooden design, demanding extensive testing. Hughes, ever defiant, defended Duramold with engineering precision and personal conviction. By the time scrutiny intensified, Hughes had already invested heavily. Though the war's urgency faded, the H-4 had become his obsession, a testament to his ambition and relentless pursuit of innovation. Now, even as the project struggled with delays, there was no shortage of bold design elements. The fuselage of the H-4 Hercules stretched an imposing 218 feet and 8 inches. The wingspan was an unprecedented 320 feet, making it one of the widest wingspans in aviation history. From wingtip to wingtip, the plane extended further than a football field, a fact that dazzled the public and fueled curiosity. Now, the tail stood 79 feet high, nearly as tall as an 8-story building. Hughes' team integrated massive control surfaces, requiring elaborate internal mechanisms to ensure that the pilot could effectively maneuver the plane. In a smaller aircraft, the pilot's control column moves might directly shift the ailerons and elevators, but for something as large as the H-4, a system of hydraulic boosters and pushrods was essential to manage the enormous forces involved. Power came from 8 Pratt & Whitney R4360 Wasp major radial engines, each generating about 3,000 horsepower. These were among the most powerful piston engines of their time, featuring 4 rows of 7 cylinders arranged radially. The diameter of the propellers alone was about 17 feet. Imagine the spectacle of these 8 giant propellers spinning simultaneously, each developing enough thrust to power a smaller aircraft on its own. Fuel capacity was another marvel, given the H-4's intended transoceanic range. Its wing tanks could hold thousands of gallons of fuel, though exact numbers vary depending on configuration. Some estimates suggest it had room for about 14,000 gallons, but the plane never came close to utilizing that capacity during its short flight history. Inside the fuselage, the cargo space stretched like a cavern. The concept of carrying 2 medium tanks was both the project's hallmark and its most audacious claim. Tanks are heavy, cumbersome, and dangerous to load, even on ships, let alone an aircraft. So to manage this, designers had to incorporate sturdy floors and reinforced structures capable of handling that immense weight. Hughes envisioned a comprehensive cargo loading system using ramps or specialized cranes, though these mechanisms never materialized beyond the planning stage. Despite, or perhaps because of, these grand ambitions, the H-4 Hercules started to look like a white elephant. Massive, expensive, and completed too late to serve its original purpose. Still, each design aspect reflected a near obsession with breaking barriers, showcasing American ingenuity at a time when the country was on a war footing and dreaming big. Henry Kaiser's patience wore thin as the project dragged on. Used to rapid ship construction, he grew increasingly frustrated with Hughes' perfectionist approach. Kaiser wanted quick solutions and straightforward manufacturing methods. Hughes insisted on comprehensive testing, constant design changes, and an almost obsessive level of detail. Kaiser's departure was inevitable. Financial overruns were adding up, and Hughes' reputation for burning through money without visible progress made investors and government officials a bit uneasy. The break left Hughes as the sole figurehead and financer, putting him under even more intense scrutiny. This shift was significant, not just financially, but symbolically. The HK-1 was renamed the H4 Hercules, reflecting Hughes as the principal force behind the project. The dream of mass-producing these giants under Kaiser's guidance evaporated. Rather than a fleet of H-4s patrolling the Atlantic, it became clear that even building one prototype was an enormous undertaking. The timeline also slipped. The original goal was to deliver prototypes during the war. By the time the plane was nearing completion in 1946, Germany already surrendered, and Japan was on the brink of defeat. The H-4 Hercules was heading toward obsolescence before it even left the ground. On the political front, critics became more vocal, demanding to know why millions of taxpayer dollars had been funneled into a project that no longer served a pressing military purpose. Members of Congress started questioning whether Hughes was simply using government money to fund his personal aviation fantasies. For his part, Hughes was unapologetic. He frequently lashed out at reporters, lawmakers, and really anyone who questioned his motives or the viability of the H-4. In public statements and eventual congressional hearings, he insisted that the plane would fly and that it would exceed expectations. What had started as a promising collaboration between two industrial giants was now just a one-man crusade to prove everyone else wrong. On November 2nd of 1947, that became a day etched in aviation lore. A crowd of onlookers, reporters, and skeptics all gathered in Long Beach, California, where the H-4 Hercules was moored. Most expected Howard Hughes to perform a few taxi tests on the water to show that the aircraft could at least move under its own power. Hughes, famously private and stubborn, had other plans. As the H-4 powered up its 8 Pratt & Whitney R4360 engines, onlookers noted the deafening roar and the massive sprays of water that were kicked up by the hull. The plan was to conduct taxi tests at various speeds, but on what was supposed to be a medium-speed run, the plane lifted off unexpectedly. It soared a mere 21 meters above the ground surface, flying for about 26 seconds over a distance of roughly 1.6 kilometers. By modern standards, this was hardly a flight at all, more like a short hop, but for those that witnessed it, the sight was nothing short of awe-inspiring. This was, after all, the largest aircraft on the planet at the time, and it had been proven that it could leave the surface, even if only briefly. Hughes, seated at the controls, had made his point. He defied critics who claimed the H-4 could never get off the ground. However, questions remained about the aircraft's true capabilities. Could it fly higher, longer, or with any significant payload? The demonstration didn't answer those concerns definitively. It did, however, silence accusations that the plane was fundamentally incapable of flight. Now, news headlines across the country declared the Spruce Goose airborne, fueling the airplane's mythic status. For many Americans, the flight was a triumphant, I told you so, from one of the era's most enigmatic figures. Yet, as awe-inspiring as it was, the flight couldn't hide the fact that the war was over, and the Hercules, it no longer had a real clear mission. Now, following the flight, newspapers, magazines, and radio stations buzzed about Hughes' giant flying boat. Now, reporters who had been predicting failure suddenly praised the H-4 as an engineering marvel. That's the media, isn't it? Now, that aside, the tone of the coverage was often skeptical or bemused. The plane had flown, yes, but for less than a minute, so no one was ever sure it would fly again. Americans, especially middle-aged men who followed the war closely, had long been intrigued by the prospect of an airborne superfortress that could transport entire armies. The reality that the Hercules had essentially missed its wartime window prompted a collective shrug. It was interesting, even astonishing, but it was also seen as a relic of a past conflict. Some newspapers ran editorials questioning the ethical and fiscal wisdom of the entire project. They pointed to Kaiser's withdrawal, the massive government funds, and Hughes' well-known eccentricities as evidence that the H-4 had been doomed from the beginning. Others praised Hughes for at least trying to push the boundaries of aviation technology. In an era still marked by post-war optimism, many Americans were torn between admiration for innovation and frustration over perceived wastefulness. The Spruce Goose became an emblem of both extremes. Families across the country talked about it at dinner tables, and aviation enthusiasts would debate its merits at clubs and flight schools. The airplane had become an American icon, albeit a bit of a polarizing one. Had the H-4 Hercules been completed earlier, it may have played a strategic role. Consider its theoretical capabilities: a 320-foot wingspan, enormous cargo capacity, and a design built to land on water. In an alternative timeline where the beast arrived in 1943, it may have changed the course of logistical planning in the Atlantic. Yet, okay, that's a big what-if. The practicality of operating such a massive seaplane across the Atlantic is very questionable. The ocean can be very unforgiving, with waves capable of damaging even the most robust flying boats. Loading Sherman tanks or hundreds of troops into a bobbing seaplane in rough seas would have been a logistical nightmare. Fuel efficiency was also a concern. Even if the plane could carry enormous amounts of cargo, the cost in fuel might have outweighed any benefit, especially compared to slower but more economical ships. Furthermore, the design was cutting edge for 1942, but outdated by 1947. Aviation advanced rapidly during the war. Jet propulsion was on the horizon, and more efficient, smaller aircraft were coming online. The impetus to build a giant flying boat waned as other technologies offered better solutions. The single flight of the H-4 highlighted the gap between its grand design goals and real-world utility. It proved that under the right conditions, the Hercules could overcome the challenges of flight, but those conditions included near-empty cargo holds, calm seas, and a short, low-altitude hop. The heroic vision of dropping off tanks or hundreds of troops in a war zone, that never came to a realization. Howard Hughes ensured the H-4 Hercules remained in a state of readiness, just in case it was ever needed. Stored in a climate-controlled hangar, maintenance crews kept it in near-flight condition, though this likely meant routine checks rather than true operational upkeep. As Hughes became more reclusive, the Hercules remained shrouded in mystery. Some speculated it was too costly to disassemble, while others believed that Hughes was waiting for a contract to justify another flight. None came. The plane became a monument to his obsession, its legend growing in the absence of further flights. Despite its reputation as a boondoggle, the H-4 was a marvel of engineering. Its Duramold construction paved the way for composite materials used in modern aerospace. Scaling up every system, hydraulics, controls, and flight instruments to accommodate its massive size was a feat of mechanical ingenuity. The cockpit was an analog masterpiece, designed for managing 8 engines and maritime operations. Flight engineers were crucial, balancing power across the engines and handling emergencies. Losing one engine in a twin-engine aircraft is difficult. Losing one in an 8-engine giant required precision adjustments to maintain control. Though it never saw full operational service, the Hercules influenced future aircraft manufacturing. Yet its technical brilliance is often overshadowed by the story of Hughes' eccentricities, its enormous cost, and its questionable practicality. The debate over whether it was a masterpiece or just a misguided folly continues to define its legacy. The exact cost of an H-4 Hercules is a topic of debate. Estimates from the late 1940s pegged it at about $23 million, a big sum for the era, equivalent to hundreds of millions of dollars in today's currency. Now, part of that cost came from the unique materials, special tooling, and labor-intensive manufacturing. Another factor was Hughes' relentless drive for perfection. Critics argue that the plane stands as a testament to wasteful spending and unchecked ambition. They cite the enormous public investment during wartime that didn't produce a timely return. Defenders counter that the H-4 was not always meant to be experimental and that breakthroughs in composite construction may not have happened as quickly without such a high-profile project. Hughes himself defended the expenditure by emphasizing his personal contributions. He claimed that much of the budget came out of his own pocket and that the government portion was relatively modest compared to what Hughes Industries poured into the project. Whether his numbers were accurate remains a subject of historical scrutiny. In any case, the question of value extends beyond dollars. The H-4 is part of a lineage of grandiose American engineering projects that push the boundaries of possibility. Even if it's never fulfilling really its original mission, it fueled public imagination and it contributed to a national identity of bold innovation. That intangible cultural and historical value is hard to quantify, but it's part of why the Spruce Goose continues to fascinate. By 1945, the war ended, and with it, the urgency for the massive H-4 Hercules. Designed to evade U-boats, the giant seaplane eventually felt obsolete in a world shifting toward commercial air travel and land-based runways. As peacetime priorities changed, smaller, more practical aircraft took center stage, leaving the Hercules without a clear purpose. Military aviation evolved rapidly. Fighter jets replaced prop-driven planes, and bombers became more advanced. The need for a colossal flying boat vanished. Yet, Howard Hughes refused to let go. To him, the H-4 wasn't just an aircraft, it was a testament to American ingenuity and his own relentless vision. Throughout the 50s and 60s, Hughes maintained the plane in a climate-controlled hangar, funding a team to keep it pristine. Rumors swirled that he may fly it again or repurpose it for cargo runs, but none materialized. Aviation enthusiasts clamored for a glimpse of the fabled behemoth, but Hughes, ever secretive, denied most requests. Occasionally, grainy photos surfaced in aviation magazines, sparking debates over the Hercules' fate. Some believed that it could still serve in a future crisis, while others dismissed it as a hangar queen, never to fly again. For decades, the plane remained hidden, its legend growing. Only after Hughes' death in 1976 did the Hercules finally re-emerge, an artifact of a bygone era when titans like Hughes dreamed on a scale that few could match. With Hughes gone, the question of what to do with the H-4 Hercules became pressing. It was still maintained, but costs for storage and upkeep were substantial. Eventually, the aircraft was moved from its secretive Long Beach hangar to a more public setting, first as part of an exhibit in Long Beach. After negotiations and planning, the H-4 found a permanent home at the Evergreen Aviation Space Museum in McMinnville, Oregon. Now, transporting the gigantic airplane itself was an engineering feat. Its massive wings had to be carefully dismantled and shipped in pieces, navigating city streets and highways under strict logistical controls. Visitors today can walk inside the Hercules cargo hold and marvel at its sheer size. Standing beneath the towering tail or alongside the enormous wings offers a glimpse into Howard Hughes' mindset. The plane has been restored and maintained in excellent condition, allowing the public to examine the Duramold construction up close. The museum provides context about the aircraft's creation, its single flight, and the broader historical forces that shaped its destiny. For aviation enthusiasts, the H-4 is a highlight, a chance to see in person what was once the largest aircraft ever built in terms of wingspan, a record it held for many years. Today, the H-4 Hercules stands as a monument to ambition, engineering prowess, and the unpredictable course of history. It reminds us of an era when American industry, propelled by war and national pride, tackled projects of unimaginable scope. Now, war may have been the catalyst, but money, technology, and visionary leadership all played roles in making the Spruce Goose a reality. Many see it as a cautionary tale about overreach. The plane's capacity never fully tested. Its cost soared, and its primary objective, evading German U-boats, was rendered moot by the end of the war. It flew just one time, briefly, and spent most of its life hidden away. Yet others view it as an inspirational feat, emphasizing the innovation in composite materials, the audacity required to attempt such a massive project, and the single successful flight that, if only for a moment, validated Howard Hughes' dream. In a sense, the Hercules exemplified the spirit of pushing boundaries, even if the final result is more symbolic than practical. Howard Hughes' personal story is deeply intertwined with the Hercules. He was once a Hollywood mogul, aviation pioneer, and recluse, whose eccentricities often overshadowed his genuine achievements. The H4 project epitomized his contradictory nature, part extravagant vanity project and part legitimate engineering breakthrough. To understand the Spruce Goose, one must also understand Hughes' desire to control every aspect of production. He wasn't merely an investor. He was a hands-on engineer who spent countless hours supervising the tiniest details, from rivets to resin formulations. This obsessive attention led to groundbreaking quality control techniques, but it also slowed the project. Hughes' stubborn refusal to accept shortcuts contributed to the plane's enormous cost, but it also ensured that it would be built to impeccable standards. Even after the war, when logic might have suggested abandoning the H4, Hughes held on, believing in its potential or perhaps his own legacy. Ultimately, the plane is a symbol of Hughes' personality, ambitious, innovative, controversial, and shrouded in secrecy. It embodies the best and worst aspects of his character, and through it, he left an indelible mark on aviation history. Over the decades, the Spruce Goose has found its way into films, documentaries, and countless references in pop culture. Cartoon shows, comedic sketches, and even video games have invoked its name as a shorthand for something massive, improbable, and often impractical. Some stories claim it was riddled with termites or fell apart after its short flight, none of which are true. Now, others speculate that Hughes planned to equip it with jet engines or refit it for new missions. While such ideas might have crossed Hughes' mind, no concrete steps were ever taken. Because of its unique flight record, just one hop, and it was never repeated, the H4 occupies a special place in the public imagination as a giant that never really soared. It's often lumped together with other high-profile engineering misfires, even though it achieved a certain measure of success by merely proving that it could leave the water surface. The Hercules also appears in discussions about aviation what-ifs, like this one. Enthusiasts debate whether the plane could have revolutionized heavy cargo transport had it ever been completed earlier, or if it could have been converted into a modern-day cargo lifter. Who knows? Technologically speaking, such conversions are improbable without a complete redesign, but the mere speculation keeps the aircraft alive in collective memory. Now, in the grand timeline of aviation, the H4 Hercules stands out for its sheer scale and the story behind it. Even though it never became fully operational, it remains a potent symbol of the transition from the piston era to the jet age. Its cameo flight took place shortly after the war, right at the cusp of a new aviation revolution. Long after the Hercules was retired to museum life, newer planes have claimed records for wingspan, cargo capacity, and overall size. The Antonov AN-225 Maria, the Airbus A380, and Stratolaunch's gigantic wingspan are modern examples that built upon decades of aviation progress. Yet each time a new record gets broken, references to the Spruce Goose always resurface, paying homage to its place in the pantheon of aviation giants. Literally. Now, in a sense, the H4's legacy persists as a benchmark for audacity. Modern engineers can study its design, marvel at its advanced for the time use of composites, and learn from both its successes and shortcomings. It stands as a reminder that pioneering new frontiers often comes with risks, high costs, and uncertain outcomes. Even though it only flew once, the H4 Hercules still captivates us as a colossal relic of engineering ambition, layered with war-era urgency and Howard Hughes' drive for perfection. It stands in the Evergreen Aviation and Space Museum today, inviting every visitor to ponder the audacity of dreams that briefly defied gravity. We hope you found this deep dive into the Spruce Goose's past enlightening and entertaining. And if you enjoyed this look at one of aviation's most iconic giants, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support helps us bring you more fascinating histories, in-depth breakdowns, and a bit of friendly humor along the way. See you next time.